The complete works of Swami Vivekananda, the Vedanta in all its phases, addressed by Swami Vivekananda in Calcutta, Part 1. A way back, where no recorded history, nay, not even the dim light of tradition, can penetrate, has been steadily shining the light, sometimes dimmed by external circumstances, at others effulgent, but undying and steady, shedding its luster not only over India, but permeating the whole thought world with its power, silent, unperceived, gentle, yet omnipotent. Like the dew that falls in the morning, unseen and unnoticed, yet bringing into bloom the fairest of roses, this has been the thought of the Upanishads, the philosophy of the Vedanta. Nobody knows when it came to flourish on the soil of India. Guesswork has been in vain. The guesses, especially of Western writers, have been so conflicting that no certain date can be ascribed to them. But we Hindus, from the spiritual standpoint, do not admit that they had any origin. This Vedanta, the philosophy of the Upanishads, I would make bold to state, has been the first as well as the final thought on the spiritual plane that has ever been vouched to man. And from this ocean of the Vedanta, waves of light from time to time have been going westward and eastward. In the days of the yore, it travelled westward and gave its impetus to the mind of the Greeks, either in Athens or in Alexandria or in Antioch. The Sankhya system must clearly have made its mark on the minds of the ancient Greeks, and the Sankhya and the other systems in India hail that one authority, the Upanishads, the Vedanta. In India too, in spite of all these jarring sects that we see today, and all those that have been in the past, the one authority, the basis of all these systems, has yet been the Upanishads, the Vedanta. Whether you are a dualist, or a qualified monoist, or Advaitist, or a Vishishta Advaitist, or a Shuddha Advaitist, or any other Advaitist, or Dvaitist, or whatever you may call yourself, they stand behind you as your authority, your Shastras, your scriptures, the Upanishads. Whatever system in India does not obey the Upanishads cannot be called orthodox. And even the systems of the Jains and the Buddhists have been rejected from the soil of India only because they did not bear allegiance to the Upanishads. Thus, the Vedanta, whether we know it or not, has penetrated all the sects in India. And what we call Hinduism, this mighty banyan, with all its immense and almost infinite ramifications, has been throughout interpenetrated by the influence of the Vedanta. Whether we are conscious of it or not, we think the Vedanta, we live in the Vedanta, we breathe the Vedanta and we die in the Vedanta. And every Hindu does that. To preach Vedanta in the land of India and before an audience seems therefore to be an anomaly. But it is the one thing that has to be preached. And it is the necessity of the age that it must be preached. For as I have just told you, all the Indian sects must bear allegiance to the Upanishads. But among these sects, there are many apparent contradictions. Many times the great sages of the yore themselves could not understand the underlying harmony of the Upanishads. Many times even sages quarreled. So much so that it became a proverb that there are no sages who do not differ. But the time requires that a better interpretation should be given to this underlying harmony of the Upanishadic texts, whether they are dualistic or non-dualistic, quasi-dualistic or so forth. That has to be shown before the world at large, and this work is required as much in India as outside of India. And I, through the grace of God, had the great good fortune to sit at the feet of one of whose life was such an interpretation, whose life a thousandfold more than whose teaching was a living commentary on the texts of the Upanishads. And it was in fact the spirit of the Upanishads living in a human form. Perhaps I have got a little of that harmony. I do not know whether I shall be able to express it or not. But this is my attempt, my mission in life to show that the Vedantic schools are not contradictory, that they all necessitate each other, all fulfill each other, and one, as it were, is a stepping stone to the other until the goal, the Advaita, the Tat Tvam Asi, is reached. There was a time in India when the Karm Kand had its way. There are many grand ideals, no doubt, in that portion of the Vedas. Some of our present daily worship is still according to the precepts of the Karm Kand. But with all that, the Karm Kand of the Vedas has almost disappeared from India. Very little of our life today is bound and regulated by the orders of the Karm Kand of the Vedas. In our ordinary lives, we are mostly Puranikas or Tantrikas, and even where some Vedic texts are used by the Brahmins of India, the adjustments of the text is mostly not according to the Vedas, but according to the Tantras or the Puranas. As such, to call ourselves Vedikas is the sense of following the Karm Kand of the Vedas, I do not think would be proper. But the other fact stands out that we are all of us Vedantists. The people who call themselves Hindus had better be called Vedantists. And as I have shown you, under that one name, Vedantika, come in all our various sects, whether dualists or monoists.